Hey guys, it's Drake, and today I'm just going to be showing some books that I bought recently. Just kind of a easy, more laid-back video because I have a couple coming up that are going to take a little more effort, and I think those will be interesting. But yeah, so just jump right into it. These are just some books I bought recently. This first one here I heard about from one of my friends. We mostly talk on the Discord server for this channel, so if you haven't joined that, go ahead and hop in there. Some pretty interesting people you can meet. But this writer here is Coup Nagai, and it's Something Strange Across the River, translated by Glenn Anderson. This is a Japanese modernist writer, early 20th century, and I will just read you the back, which is what got me interested in the writer. So, first published in 1937, this is a book both modern and nostalgic. It shows a changing city, its slums, back streets, temples, and shrines, a city filled with erudite establishments and riverside brothels. It shows a man trying to justify his life and a glimpse into the creative process, and is, as well, a gentle eulogy on things passing. It says a little bit about the translator there, but yeah, so just kind of looked pretty neat. I like that idea about things passing. That's been something I've been thinking about a lot. I think I just think about that a lot in general because I think so much about history and spend so much of my time in times that are past and have been past for a long time. That ubi sunt theme that is really prevalent in Old English poetry is something that's been on my mind a lot, especially with books like Dissipatio HG, post-apocalyptic books. Those are explicitly about things passing, and so I just thought that was kind of an interesting idea. This idea of seeing what a Japanese person would have thought about nostalgia and things passing in the early 20th century. I mean, surely a lot of stuff was changing. So that's one I'm pretty interested in getting to. And then this next one here might look a little familiar. So this was actually the first book I recommended for my Patreon subscribers. And I did have something to say about this just in general. So one thing I'm planning on doing for my Patreon is in the last few years, my ability to read Spanish has really improved. I've been working at it quite a lot, practicing speaking, practicing reading, and generally I can read most books now in Spanish, like in the original. Of course, there are just some books that even native speakers have trouble reading, and of course I have trouble reading those and need a dictionary and need to think about them a lot, but generally I can manage books in Spanish now. But I still have quite a lot of books that I had bought originally in English, the translations of Spanish originals, and I really don't need those anymore. And I'm in the process of switching out all of my books that are translated into English but were in Spanish originally. And I'm planning on giving away most of them on my Patreon. Basically the way it is, the way I did the first one, which was my copy of the Empty Book, which is pretty difficult to find from what I understand. I haven't found a copy for sale in a long time, at least the English edition. So one of the guys that's been really nice, leaves comments and supports the Patreon, he claimed it. First come, first serve, and he got it. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to say, if you're interested in getting some books that I have that are generally more Latin American, I don't have a huge amount of Spanish, like Spanish books, but might be giving away a couple Javier Marias, or just general Latin American books, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Peru translations. So can't guarantee how often that'll be though. Might be once a month, once every 2-3 months. It all depends on basically how often I buy the originals in Spanish. So anyway, go check out the Patreon if you're interested in that. Also, I'm releasing book recommendations there for rare books. So if you're interested in the books that I share and you want to get a head start on buying those for rare books, just go ahead and look at that. But anyway, this is the Spanish edition, so it has El Libro Vacío and then Los Años Falsos, which is the false years, which is also translated, but that one's also hard to find. So I was pretty pleased to find this one here. And then third, we have a work that's originally in Russian called The Burn by Vasily Axionov. If I'm saying that right, probably got the stresses wrong, but I first heard of this book from Andre with the Untranslated. He made a list of books that are unbelievably translated, and this was one of them. So this one is pretty interesting. It's a Russian book that captures the 60s in Moscow. And I thought that was kind of interesting because, you know, 60s is after Stalin, when they're trying to pull back some of the like extremely oppressive measures. So this guy, at least the way I understand it, haven't read it yet, but the way I understand it is that his generation was really the first generation that could kind of grow up in a less oppressive environment compared to the parents who would have been in gulags and that sort of thing, like Solzhenitsyn, that sort of idea, fighting against the government, dissident. This guy, I think, was still pretty much suppressed by the government, but was still a little more free than his predecessors, from what I understand. But yeah, it just seems like a pretty interesting book. So decided to get that one. If you're interested in the reviews on the back there, you can pause it. Translated by Michael Glennie. I'm trying to get better at mentioning the translators whenever I look at translated books. And then we have a work originally in English, The Volcano God by Philip Freund, probably Freund. And I found this one by one of my other favorite book reviewers, apart from Andre from the Untranslated. I found this one from the Neglected Books page. Found it on Twitter, I believe, with like a posting of a review. But I was pretty interested in this one because, as you can see, it's pretty thick and is actually written about the time in World War II. So also kind of an interesting cover. But I will just read the flap here. So, The Volcano God. London during the Blitz provides the background to this startling and monumental novel. Its characters, brought together by their visits to the reading room of the British Museum, are ever more closely linked by the upheavals of war. Each one in his own way seeks the spiritual strength to meet the great crisis. The civil servant and his novelist wife, the young scientist gathering top-secret data, the music critic, the student, the anarchist, the young strangers from the New World. As they meet, they find love and friendship, antipathy and hate, and they vividly debate their widely divergent views in a series of brilliant dialogues unequaled in contemporary literature for their scope and originality of presentation. I thought this was neat just because it seems to me like a fairly unusual thing in English writing at the time. And if I remember correctly, this guy was he was actually American. Oh, born in Canada, so that's kind of neat. Makes his home in the United States, but this takes place in London. But this basically seems like somewhat of a more philosophical novel, and kind of reminded me of something of the Recognitions, at least reading about it, you know, these sort of philosophical discussions and trying to find strength in an unspiritual time or something like that. Might not be the best way to phrase it, at least as far as the recognitions goes, but that's kind of what this seems like. So I thought this was kind of interesting, and also it doesn't seem to be very well known, so that's always a nice treat if you can find something good like that. But yeah, you can still find this one for pretty cheap, so if you're interested in this sort of thing, I'd recommend picking it up. I might read it and do a review of it in the near future. So, Volcano God, and I believe this is a William Blake on the front there, which makes it even better. So, the Volcano God, and this is, I think, a trilogy of novels all in one, but I think in America it was published only this way. So, the Volcano God. And then we have two history books here. For as long as I can remember, literally, like early years of my life, I've loved history. I think that's basically how I got into reading classics, is because I just loved history, so it just seemed so obvious to me to read older books. I know a lot of people don't have that same path, so it might be a little more difficult to enjoy classics straight off, but I love them. So this one here is Mohammad Mosadek and the 1953 coup in Iran. So I'm sure you guys know about this, but the reason I've been interested in this coup especially, and also two other periods in history in the, one was in the 50s and one was in the 60s to 80s. So this one, and then Guatemala from the 40s to the 50s was time, democratic land reform, agricultural revolution to an extent, and then they started getting a little too confident, I guess, against American business interests, and America sent in the military and put in a dictator that destabilized Guatemala for a while, but made them accept American corporate interest, I guess you could say. I don't have that book yet, but I have it in my cart, and I think its purchase and reading is imminent. And then the other one, the third one of the group that I want to learn about, because I think it'll teach me a lot about U.S. history, U.S. foreign policy, why people hate the U.S., is this book about Zimbabwe in the 1965, which is when Zimbabwe was, I guess, liberated from British control. But the United States helped fund a white supremacist group that subsequently was in control of Zimbabwe for 15 years, from 65 to 80, if I remember my dates correctly. I also don't have that book, but that's another one I'm interested in, just to see, because I think, especially if you live in America, you get this unbelievably watered down, just absolutely ridiculous view of America from U.S. history in school. And I think part of the problem with that is whenever you get this like ridiculous view, then people start to get an overly cynical view where, especially now, I think with race relations, you start to only see America in the context of its race relations and slavery and things, which if that's all you focus on, of course you'll get a pretty negative view of the US, but any sufficiently large country, let alone something like the US, even though it's only a couple hundred years old, will have just an impossibly large set of details in its history that if you want to focus on the negative things, all you'll see for the rest of your life are the negative things. And then also similarly, if you focus on the positive things, all you'll see for the rest of your life are the positive things. So of course, the best thing to do is to balance those out. pay attention to the negative things, pay attention to the positive things. But I think especially foreign policy stuff is underrepresented, even among people who think they're really, cynical and, oh, the U.S. is a horrible country and all this. Even people who live in the U.S. and take advantage of all the benefits it gives. So I don't want to be one of those people. So I think learning a little bit about this coup in Iran, which is when Mosadek was really popular, tried to nationalize the British oil control, and of course Britain didn't like that, and the US also didn't like that, so they deposed Mosadek and got a dictator in there that would allow Britain and the US to exploit Iranian oil reserves, which disintegrated and led to a theocracy which funds most of the terrorism against the United States. So, yeah, I think it would be good to read about the precipitating factor in a lot of that. And this book, from what I can tell, one of the best ones. It's basically a series of essays edited by Mark Gasarovsky and Malcolm Byrne, published by Syracuse. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And then lastly here, really happy with this one. A History of the Spanish Civil War. Now, how I started getting into this is a little circuitous. Andre just recently put out his review of Attila by Alyosha Kol, which I'm just totally fascinated by. And I bought a copy, and I had this unbelievably convoluted problem getting Attila by Alyosha Kol. Apparently in Spain, there's a problem where if you're a business and you're trying to sell to people, I guess, outside the EU, I'm assuming they need some sort of special permit that is expensive or they don't get. So then it's impossible or very difficult to ship to the US, for example, because I had this problem where I ordered Attila because there was a copy available, and the guy said he couldn't ship it to me because of a state of emergency. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Because then he offered to be able to ship it to anywhere in Europe or the EU. And I was like, well, if there's a state of emergency, why could you ship it to Europe? But I mean, I wasn't going to argue with him because luckily I have some friends in Europe. So I, did this whole convoluted thing, had it sent to one of my friends, and then he shipped it to me in the US from Germany. Unfortunately, I still have not received it because I think the mail's messed up or the German customs are lazy or just something. I don't know. I'm just hoping it eventually ends up somewhere noticeable. But yeah. And because of that interest in Alyosha Kol, I've gotten into Javier Marias again because they were friends. And that's part of the reason why I just read A Heart So White. But when I was looking into Javier Marias, I was looking into the Spanish Civil War and the dictatorship, the Franco dictatorship that came subsequently. Because I guess that was pretty influential for Marias because his father was a well-known philosopher and political figure and had to leave Spain because he wasn't part of the dominant group. And Marias, I was kind of surprised by this. I think I knew it, but I didn't really take it significantly that the dictatorship ended in 1975, which seems pretty late. It seems kind of like primitive thing to have a dictatorship in Western Europe in 1975, but I guess that's just the way it was. And then Javier Marias mentions a little bit about it and talks about what life was like And it was just pretty interesting, but I've always been fascinated by the Spanish Civil War. Also, I like Noam Chomsky, and he talks about, Catalonia and anarchist, anarcho-syndicalists and stuff. So, yeah, I just thought it'd be really fascinating, and it's just an interesting time anyway. So I looked, try to find the best books on it, and I found this. Burnett Bulletin, The Spanish Civil War, Revolution and Counter-Revolution. And this one, as you can see, is huge. Has some boxing on it, but it's a huge book. It's like 1,100, 1,200 pages. But yeah, the way I kind of treat these sort of history books is treat them more as reference books, get an idea of each part and then read it as I want when I'm curious about it. But yeah, so I'm pretty pleased with this one. It's an expensive book. I kind of waited it out a couple weeks and found a cheaper copy. So if you're interested in it, beware. This one's an expensive one. But yeah, so just interested in the similarities between Spain before the Civil War and the U.S. currently. Because I think we're probably at one of our more fraught times in recent history as far as political division and wealth inequality, throw in the coronavirus debacle and poor education standards, upheaval that artificial intelligence is going to give to the job market, China becoming a more powerful country, possibly more powerful than the U.S. in the next 20 years. It's going to be a lot of change in the U.S., and if it goes the wrong way, I think we can end up in a dicey spot. So I'm just interested in the ways that we might overlap with some time like the pre-Spanish Civil War. Also, I'm interested in looking into the Cultural Revolution in China, because I do see some similarities, at least without me knowing very much about the Cultural Revolution in China. And I know there's a 3-volume work published by Duke University Press on the Cultural Revolution. So I'd like to look into that relatively soon, if possible. But of course, that's a lot of effort there. But anyway, yeah, that's just kind of what I've been interested in, books I've been looking at, and then just things I've been thinking about. So just wanted this to be kind of an easy, laid-back video. If you've read any of these, let me know, or if you're interested in any of them, let me know too. Also, if you know any recommendations about Mohammed Mosadek or any good books on the Spanish Civil War, whether fiction, nonfiction. I know Orwell's Homage to Catalonia. I haven't read that one, but I have it in the back of my mind. I'm sure I'll get to it eventually. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Death is a Gang Boss.